really need to observe how you're using everything in conjunction with your market. Everything in dog training is everything because everything matters. If you're not observing what you're actually doing and how you're saying things, I get on to my pet people all the time about this. Is like when their dogs just going through the motions and where they're just like, yes, yes, yes. And then like a dog does something great, they're like, yes. And they have this giant party. That marker is much different. That yes is much different than yes. Everything is everything in dog training. And the way that you say things and how you punch your words out, it matters to the dog. If you're going to say no and you're not going to show them what right is, how can you ever expect right? If you keep just pounding BS into their head about no, nothing, you can't do this, you can't do that, it's just conflict. Then your dog's not going to want to work with you, but you got to do it correctly. But anybody can figure it out. That's my big thing is like, if you're watching this and you've been training for 30 years in a certain way and you're thinking about stepping out and going into a different methodology, do it, man. You may find that you love it and it works way more and it just clicks with you. And you're like, oh my God, where's this world been for, the past 30 years?
It goes back to, again, the value in all this. And so I wanted to highlight that before expanding on the variable reward structure, because again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The whole point of using the reward is essentially to use that to create value in the e-collar, the cue, the command, what have you, to where the behavior in of itself is the reward or the reinforcer, if you will, for the dog. Yeah. And so for that to happen, you have to create the value to where you're always getting paid. When they're learning and you're teaching, they always get paid. They know like this behavior brings reward. This behavior brings reward. Then you can go into like intermittent, you can go into variable, either way, whether it's the frequency or the amount. Like I call it the jackpot reward. I think you called it something else a minute ago, like monster reward or something like that. Yeah. Either way, like you start taking that away to where sometimes they get paid. And then you start expanding it to where it's lesser and lesser and lesser. And then it's like, oh man, you did amazing. Here's a jackpot reward. But the goal is to still get to where it's possible. It's no longer always, it's possible, but because you've built that value and conditioned it so well, the marker and the behavior itself becomes that dopamine release or that reward to that dog. And so you're not always having to go into the field or a hunting situation with a pocket full of kibble or hot dogs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
If people started thinking about training not so much in the aspect of reward as much as more so in the aspect of dopamine and how it relates to their dog, it changes the way that you look at training. Because you'll look at your training differently. You'll see your dog going through behaviors that they know. You'll know exactly which ones they hate and which ones they love. And if your dog's got drive, you should know that anyway. But if you start thinking about training and your behaviors in dopamine, it answers a lot of questions for a lot of people. But there was something that I wanted to talk about, and really because it's kind of glossed over. Whenever you talk about markers, people immediately go to, oh, reward marker. Oh, I need to mark, X, Y, Z, and that needs to pay. And, that's great and all. Paying your dog is great and all. It's equally important to tell your dog no, right? It's equally important to tell your dog, hey, you've done the wrong thing, right?
Well, I got to shut this podcast off now. I can't tell my fur baby no. It can't be done. No, that everything that they've thought of doing and every behavior that they do is all good. We cannot tell a dog no, or else they just will not like me.
Man, you would you would believe, but most people wouldn't believe how many people I tell like, oh yeah, you can tell your dog no. And they're like,
no,
okay, no, my dog will hate me. I'm like, no, your dogs are in the moment creatures. They'll hate you right now, but then when you feed them later, they're gonna love you again.
Well, and it's not even so much they hate you right now. They hate not getting the reward or the dopamine. That's what they're chasing. They're not chasing your approval.
Exactly. Dogs, and this is gonna ruffle some feathers. Mainly the people that are like, oh, my dog loves me people. But like, dogs are in the moment creatures and they are master manipulators and they're selfish. I love my dogs to death. He's selfish. He knows exactly how to use me and it works every time.
Yeah.
But
I
It's equally,
it's a good thing because they're selfish and they're always working for what in their self-interest. That allows us to anticipate and understand what they're after, understanding what drives them, how we can manipulate that to get what we want. And that's why, again, nitpicking words and what people do, but it goes back to when somebody is like, "Oh, my dog loves to hunt for me or because I love it or they want to make me happy." They want to make you happy because what makes you happy also makes them happy. It's not because they're
yeah,
actually making you happy. I know it's
yeah,
kind of semantics, but there is kind of a line that would help some people if they understood that a little bit better. The selfishness in the dog is a good thing for us as trainers.
yeah. It's not to demonize the dog, but handler happiness is a byproduct of dog success and the dog achieving its position, um, to the level that it desired. Um, Man, TBIs suck. I forgot where I was going with that one.
I was about to say, did I knock you off your thought process?
Yeah, that one was gone there.
My bad.
No, but negative markers, right? It's important to have a negatively charged marker, and it's important when, if I say it's important one more time, I'm going to punch myself in the face. But when we're talking about negatives and good or bad, um, don't think good or bad. Like if you're listening to this, don't think good or bad, right? It's it's add subtract, right? So if I negatively mark something, I'm going to then subtract something from that equation, right? So if I'm sending my dog to place and the dog veers off, misses it, goes somewhere else, whatever, no, you're wrong, right? Then we get into operant conditioning. Here we go. I tell my dog no. I withhold their reward. I withhold whatever they perceive as the reward. I mean, it could be a number of things. And what's going to precipitate from that, right? Okay, negative marker, possibly, negative reinforcement on the e-collar or the line or whatever you're on. Frustration is going to precipitate, which is going to produce cortisol, which is going to produce the dog trying to find the answer quicker, right? The dog's like, damn, I'm wrong. Okay, well, let me fly through this and let me try and figure it out. And this is why timing is important, because in that moment of frustration where the dog's like, well, I don't know what you're asking. What do you want? The dog hops on the place board. Is this what you want? You're like, yes. And the dog fires off. Bang. That is a huge moment for that dog right there, right? In one simple word, no. Dog figures out, yes. Bang, right? Your negative marker is important because it's going to precipitate things in your dog. It's going to give you a fork in the road, right? Did you do it? No. Okay, what now? Lay there and die or figure it out, right? Like,
Right.
not really. I shouldn't have even said it like that, but you have options there. When you start giving the dog more than one method of communication, right? Or more than one way to perceive that communication, right? Negative doesn't have to be bad. It can be
Just
something good. It can be the road to something good.
well, the removal of the e-collar pressure to kind of go off of and piggyback off of the negative reinforcement on the e-collar to a place. The
Yeah.
dog, you apply the collar pressure, the dog goes to the place board, you release the pressure. By removing that e-collar, that's the first positive. That is
Yeah. That's the
positive
first positive.
reinforcement, right? Then you can mark it and pay them for a second positive. So you're kind of doubling up on like, yes, that's exactly what I want. Or to your
Yeah.
point, if you remove the e-collar once they go on place board and they jump off, you can say like it's like, oh, you did good by getting on the place board, but then you jumped off, so you did bad, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so like you can start playing with this, and that's why it's so important. Is like you have two different words that the dog understands, and you're
Yep.
saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So you can really kind of hone in, and the dog understands good, bad, floor, lava. It's
Yeah.
really that simple. And then you just rinse, wash, repeat, and the dog, starts to get a little bit more accurate and precise.
Exactly. And through classical conditioning, when your dog is e-collar correctly. Everything's been taught correctly on the e-collar, and that's paramount important that you do everything correct on the e-collar first. When you go to negatively mark, like say a dog leaving a place, right? Dog goes to step down, we negatively reinforce and we're marking at the same time, right? So e-collar comes on, negative mark happens, whether it's nope, nope, wrong, whatever the word, it doesn't matter. It can be a damn sound, right? Like those things are happening at the same time. So the dog is pairing now, right? No means this slightly annoying, unpleasant feeling. Okay, well, how do I turn this off? I go back into target behavior, right? It's literally the definition of negative reinforcement. Um, so now through classical conditioning, when the dog is later on in training, we'll find ourselves when the dog is missed the mark, when we say that no, we get an equal response to just the no without the e-collar, right? Because now the dog is paired. Okay, no equals this. I need to fix it, right? And I think people should observe that when you're using your e-collar and notice when you're pairing things with your e-collar. We call that the contact method, right? When you pair an e-collar with whatever cue that precedes a command or event, right? So like the, bump, bump, place, bump, bump, down, bump, bump, okay, right? To go away and receive the reward indirectly. You really need to observe how you're using everything in conjunction with your markers.
Yeah.
Um, Justin Rigney told me this, everything in dog training is everything because everything matters. Like, and again, to Pat Nolan's, like, you can intend to teach whatever. It's like, what did you teach the dog? If you're not observing what you're actually doing and how you're saying things, like, I get on to my pet people all the time about this. Is like, when their dog's just going through the motions and they're like, oh, a structured training event or a structured training session where they're just like, yes, 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 or no, yes. And then like when I'm not there and the dog does something great where, the dog previously hadn't, they're like, yes. And they have this giant party, right? That marker is much different.
Yeah.
Right. That yes is much different than yes. Right. Or when I'm not there and they're like, no, and they're telling their dog no when something bad's happening. That no is much different than the no.
Yeah.
Right. Everything is everything in dog training. And the way that you say things and how punch your words out or your phrases out, sounds, it matters to the dog. And it can become essentially what we're talking about, a marker.
Tone, body language, all that plays into all this.
Exactly.
You mentioned Justin Rigney. You mentioned Pat Nolan. Delmar Smith was telling me the small things are the big things. I mean, it really is. I mean, again, common threads. The small details matter, and you consistently do something wrong, and then unintentional lessons are had all the times. Dogs learn stuff that we do not want them to learn. More is caught than taught. It's the same thing, as being a father. As you have kids. It's like, how often do your kids pick up on things that it's like, and y'all speak our language, at least to some degree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and I love using my kids as analogies when it comes to dog training because dog training is a microcosm for human behavior. Really, if you think about it in levels of conditioning, I mean, I could condition my son to do anything with M&Ms. Right?
Right.
M&Ms and a clicker, like I'll get that kid to do whatever you want.
Well,
but
dude, it's funny you say that. My wife is going to kill me for telling this story. It's going to embarrass her so much. But I was actually just talking to Randall earlier today, and I told him, I was like, I could kind of take this as a compliment, a strange compliment, but it's a testament to how consistent I am with my dogs around the house in front of my daughter. She just turned 3 recently, and so again, this is going to embarrass the mess out of her, but out of nowhere, my daughter will she'll be carrying on a 3-year-old level conversation, and out of nowhere she just squats down, gets on all fours and says, "Me puppy." And she requires me
Nice.
to treat her like one of the dogs. Like, she will get mad if I walk off and I don't heel her off. She will get mad if I don't, woe her at a threshold and then release her. Like, it's, and she will carry it on for like 2, 3 minutes, and then her 3-year-old brain kind of loses interest. But
Yeah.
then I'm already watching her try and do that same behavior that I'm doing to the dogs, and she just by me watching me with the dogs, she picked up on it. It's the same thing with the dogs. Like, if you're consistent enough, even when the things that you aren't trying to communicate, you are communicating to that dog. Fortunately
Oh
and
yeah.
unfortunately, I mean, that's why we've all seen to where some trainers, like, some people try and they give it a good effort, but it's just like some people, like, it's just not connecting. But somehow the dog still, over time, with enough opportunities and enough reps, still squeak through. And for the lack of skill or experience on the handler's part, they still will get to a certain level where they are doing that behavior to some degree, right? And so it's a
Yeah.
testament to, like, the intelligence. It's a testament to the breeding of these dogs. It's, I think it's hilarious that the people that so often get frustrated with their dogs not understanding, like, why won't you just do this? They will also be the ones talking, in an hour, about how smart their dogs are. And it's like, well, if you're acknowledging how intelligent your dog is and how well it picks up on things, but then you're struggling to understand why the dog isn't picking up on what you're trying to teach it, look inward instead of at the dog, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand the kind of double standard there.
You hit the nail on the head, right? With the whole everything before training even starts, before hunting even starts, really, when you get the dog, it's it's about breeding. It's about the genetics. It's about, you know, the what's going to be put into that dog stock before you get it, right? I I love watching baseball with my son, right? I played baseball a lot in high school. I thought I was really good at it. But guess what? I'm not. I was a pitcher. Guess what? I'm not. I'm not 6'2". I'm not, 220 pounds coming down the mound with 90-mile-per-hour fastballs. 5'11", depending on what convenience store I'm walking out of. And, you know, I'm about 200 because you got to be 200 or two something to do something. Um, you can't take a lackluster dog or where the breeding hasn't been as on point as a multi-generation champion whatever. That dog and these dogs are not the same. Their lineages and everything that's going into them stock before you get them are not the same, right? I can't make myself an MLB baseball player because I don't have the genetics to do it. I damn sure don't have the genetics to play in the NBA. As much as I want to, it's not there. It's not for me. Some dogs you just can't make what you want them to be.
But
Really, when you look inward, like you got to look at your inward into the dog too. Like, does your dog have it?
yes.
Right? Like,
And man, that is so tough, because it's like people feel like if you are honest, you don't even have to, like, criticize your dog. Just accept, like, this is a shortcoming. This is
mm-hmm.
how, if you're a breeder or you're planning to breed your dog, this is also how you figure out how you create something better on the back end, is recognizing their
Yeah,
shortcomings. And, using your baseball analogy, it's not that you can't play baseball. You just can't play baseball to that level of the
yeah,
best of the best, but you were serviceable. And, if we're
yeah,
talking hunting dogs, we're not talking life and death situations that, you and Randall and others are put in, the police canine, the working dogs. We're not playing to that extreme. We're playing with hunting dogs. And so the average person, I would argue, they don't need the best of the best of the best dog. They need a dog to go out there, find birds, and hold birds long enough for them to get there. And so, like,
mm-hmm.
when so many people get in this world, everybody comes at them talking to them about training as if their dog is the next VC. And I'm a firm believer in shoot high, right?
Yeah, aim high.
Aim for the moon. but there's a lot of criteria and context that goes into building that dog that you're not going to get if you just list out all the tasks that are on the test and train for those tasks. You have to start from a puppy and build that skill set. You didn't learn to throw a baseball or pitch a baseball by just being thrown out there on the mound and being like, hey, on game day, you're going to have to throw this 90 feet and
Yeah,
strike that batter out. No, you're in the backyard. Like, all right, here's how you hold a baseball. Here's how you
yeah.
pick up the baseball and like forward motion. Like we break it down, but for some reason, people when they get these dogs, it's like it's like if I require perfect, staunchness or back to the place. If I require an 8 week old puppy to go on that place board and never come off that place board, I don't have to worry about it. It's like, yeah, but what are we really teaching that dog by requiring a dog at
Hmm.
that young of an age, that level of duration? What does that really benefit in the bigger picture? And that's what you're saying, that like, let's think about this in a different light and start thinking about what drives the dog, the dopamine and all of that.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important to, I would say I don't like people that get a dog and then for the first year they're just like, oh, just let a puppy be a puppy. We have to start establishing boundaries. Have to start building foundations and principles. But I also don't like the people or I don't dislike the people. I don't agree with the people that get an 8 week old puppy and require the dog to sit on a place board for 5 minutes before it gets its food. It's like
Exactly.
that there's better ways to approach this than that.
Yeah. You can't expect adult dog things out of a young dog, a young puppy for that matter. And I'll be the first to say my experience with puppies outside of pets is rather minimal, but I have some. And I'll tell you this, letting them just be a puppy is about, in my opinion, one of the worst things that you can do to them, because you're not giving them any structure. You're not giving them any boundaries aside from what annoys the shit out of you. That's the only thing that you're correcting.
Right.
Right. And then at that point, you're only breeding in conflict with you. Um, so having the ability to give that dog structure and have realistic expectations of the dog at the age, right? Like, make training the game, make all of that just a happy event that produces good emotion. But again, it kind of goes back to that human analogy of, throwing baseball in the backyard with pops. It's like, called that bucket time with dad. And it wasn't very enjoyable. But, you got to learn the small things first.
Yeah.
And especially when you have a young puppy and you're trying to teach these, foundation building blocks to incredibly technical tasks. I would argue to say to teach a dog to go out on a line and run a straight line with my minimal knowledge of gun dog stuff. And I don't know if you know Chris Armanini.
I'm actually linking up, spoiler alert for everybody. I'm actually linking up with Chris and
Oh man,
Rigby in a 3 or 4 weeks,
oh,
something like that. So by the time
good
this comes out, I think the week that this will come out, I'm actually going to be with those guys.
dude. Chris is such a great guy, and you want to talk about a wealth of knowledge. Chris is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that stuff. I go to him for stuff like that. But the incredibly to us, an incredibly basic task of simply running a straight line out to a certain distance, getting something and bringing it back seems pretty simple to us. But when you break it down step by step and you want the dog to understand, okay, look downrange. Okay, go until you feel me stop. Pay attention to that. Okay, well, when you get there, I want you to turn around and I want you to watch for this 200 meters away,
Yeah.
right? When the dog's got to be like, shit, I don't know, what?
Yeah.
Like,
It's just a spec. Yeah. It's like, I can't even make them out.
yeah, exactly, right? And then he's got to find whatever you're sending him out there to get, and then he's got to bring it back.
Yeah.
Like, just the task of bringing it back. Hold it in your mouth, run with it. Don't get distracted. Don't drop it. If you do drop it, don't sit there and freaking play with it. Bring it back to me, hold it there, in a heel position, look up at me, and when I hold my hand under you, I want you to drop it in my hand,
Yeah.
right? And really, that entire chain, you have to train each individual part of that,
Yeah.
and you have to successfully approximate every behavior to that. Truly teach the entire behavior chain. And
Man,
when you're
that's yeah. I don't want to interrupt you again because I don't want to keep
no, go ahead.
interrupting your thought process. But that's why, like, I wanted to stop you like 10 times throughout that and be like, this is why it's so important to understand. You guys call it chunking,
Yes.
isolating the behavior and what you're after. That's why if you want to go out there and you want to teach a dog to take a 200-yard blind, the solution is not to go out there and just do a cold blind out of nowhere. You have to show the dog the correct behavior. We have to go back and build each one of those components as if we're baking a cake and each step is one of the ingredients, right? You have to
Yeah.
go and you have to establish the send off. You have to establish doing the lines. You have to go down pretty much every step that you just described, but you don't teach it all in the full setup. And it's the same way whether you're doing the retrieve, in our world, steadiness. This is another big one where so many people want to teach steadiness by setting up the entire scenario. They're going to go plant three or five birds. It's never two, it's never four, it's always three, it's or five. That's how people do it. They go plant it
Yeah.
in short green grass and they go and they ask and require the full sequence start to finish, from the hunt to the find to the steadiness to the retrieve. And it's like if you just broke that down into individual little segments and you establish and you build the hunt, then we're going to
Hmm.
establish the point. Then we're going to ask for the dog to stay steady for me to flush. Then we're going to get to the shot. Then we're going to get to the to staying until I release you. Then the retrieve, and we teach the retrieve outside of that scenario. That's when you can lump it all together and you get the behavior we're talking about. And then that's why
Yeah.
these markers are so useful, because you can chunk all of this stuff, teach this all of these little segments, and then piece them all together. You throw them all in together and you have a nice cake at the end of when that oven
Yeah.
chimes.
And really, like, I'll tell you exactly why people don't like training that way and they stick to their old outdated methods, because at some point those methods worked for a certain dog that they had and they just applied that method to every dog and then tweaked a little bit, right? But in their mind it's like, oh, it's always worked. But really, like, when you train each individual behavior in that manner and you make every micro behavior into a finely tuned point, and then you start putting it all together, and then eventually test day has to come, right? You proof your behavior, you find out where the pitfalls are, you go back and you train those individual behaviors because everything else is understood, right? That allows you the moment to fine tune and really sharpen your entire behavior chain. But the reason that people don't like training in that method is because it doesn't yield quick results. Everybody's looking for quickness. Everybody wants right now, right? That's a human thing. It's a human thing. We want right now. The dog, expecting a dog to just do everything out the gate, like, you're starting them at failure. In our world, in our unit, right, special operations, we're held to a very high standard. Our new guys that come in, we have to understand that they're not at the same level as the guys that have been there for 10 years. We have to train them on the basics first. Once we get all the basic tasks, the micro behaviors to a fine sharpened point, we can put it all together, right? I was on a deployment one year with some dudes that were in a unit that we all aspire to be at. And everybody tries to get there because it's the tip top. And we're going out to this range one day, and we look at these guys like gods because they're not human beings. They're like legitimately, I don't know how these people get on this earth, but they do inhuman things. Um, and we're going out there, we're going to this range, and one of these guys comes out there with us, and I'm warming my guys up. We're doing, basic drills to get ready for more technical drills down the road. This guy comes out there and he's like, "Hey, you guys mind if I hop in on your drills?" And we all looked at each other. We're like, "Man, we're doing real basic shit. Like, what do you want to shoot with us for? Like, you should be doing something else, right?" And he's like, "No, I'm gonna do this basic stuff with you guys." He warmed up in the same way that we did. All his high level stuff, all of his high level skills are just the basics mastered. That's all it is. And you achieve that through isolation of micro behavior, fine tuning to a sharpened point, and then chunking it all together.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just throw a dog out there and expect them to do without showing them each piece.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, and I know we kind of veered way off course on just markers in this, but I mean, it all kind of comes together on
Yeah,
in all of this stuff. It's a full package. It's hard to talk about any of this without talking about it as a whole. And that's why it does take time. But this is also why, like, so many people in the world that I know and I'm familiar with, they will get their dog ready for a test. They will go pass the
mm,
test. And then you see that dog a week or two later, and the dog, it's like they have zero understanding of any of the behaviors that they were supposed to have mastered on the test that they just passed. And
yeah,
it's not a knock on anybody, but like if you go out on a lot of these dogs, they do have enough drive and enough forgiveness to where you can, with enough pressure and proper timing, make these dogs do it for a few weeks, right? But
mm-hmm,
you're not developing and conditioning the behavior. And that's why
yeah,
every single year you hear people say, I need to go knock the rust off. He hasn't seen a bird since last season. So he's going to go bump a bunch. You haven't established. And that's not to say that if you do it this way or through the quadrants or operant conditioning or balance training, like that doesn't mean that your dog's never going to screw up again. They're dogs, they're living creatures that,
yeah,
they make mistakes, but the foundation's always there for you to revert back to where if all you have is I can make the dog do it with a collar. We talk about collar dependency dogs. That's what you're going to have is you're going to have a dog that will only do it if you have the e-collar remote in your hand. And
yeah,
I don't think there's any person in this space that if you talk to them when they have a puppy, be like, hey, we can get your dog up to a certain level fast and quick, but you're always going to have this remote in your hand. I don't think anybody would knowingly accept that as an option. They would prefer, like,
no,
they want the dog that it's ingrained in them to work with you, right? For the same kind of goal. And you can build that with these dogs, but it takes time. It's not, you're not getting a puppy and you're like, hey, I'm doing this finish level test in, a year and a half.
yeah, exactly. And like, it kind of goes to that like almost lethal triad of things. And it's really in like sales. We do things three ways: good, fast, and cheap. You can have any two of those.
But not all
If
three.
if you want it good and fast, it ain't gonna be cheap.
Yeah.
If you want it fast and good, or if you want it, uh, you know,
Good and fat.
whatever,
Yeah.
it's not gonna be good,
Yeah.
right? So you really have to kind of pick and choose how you're going to go about this. And I would rather slow it way down, get get the behavior I want, get it solid and predictable to the point where I don't have to knock the rust off. My dog comes out, they jack it up a couple times, I negatively mark, tell them no, do this, right? And I give them the job again, and we start going through the little bit of reigniting the thought process. And then it's just like, oh, yep, switch flipped, dog gets it, right?
Yeah.
Because essentially, when you're knocking the rust off, you only trained for that one succession of behavior, the show, and then you never train the show again,
Yeah.
right? Like that's why your dog's not going to rust off, because the show's different
Yeah.
and all of your stuff changed.
Yeah. Man, I would love to continue talking about this stuff for, 2 more hours because, it's just fun and I had an entire like other list of things to get on rewards and reward
My
structure and
bad, I get off
hierarchy. Nah,
track.
you're good,
I'm
man.
sorry.
It just gives me another topic for another day. We can revisit this later. It just gives me something else to
Yeah,
explore. But going back, let's actually try and finish on the importance of markers. Is I do want to really hit home on paying in position or in
Yeah.
behavior, because I think this is something that I have very recently kind of noticed that maybe this is directly applicable in the field, to where like if in the bird dogs, getting a dog completely steady to release, they're anticipating the retrieve, right?
Hmm.
Something I was in the field with Nate a few weeks ago, and since then I've really thought about what I saw, and me and him discussed, and paying the dog who wants that bird wants that retrieve, but we want stability in the behavior, which is staying in position, staying in whoa, if you will, remaining in point until I release you. If you have a dog that's always on edge and about to tip over and break, maybe the best thing is to not go up to them and release them for the retrieve, that they have to learn that sometimes the reward still comes through you, and I'm going to come pay
Yes.
you instead of releasing you to go get the reward. And I think this goes back to the direct and indirect rewards that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of lends a hand to hierarchy of reward. And we can kind of touch that real quick. And I don't know if you went over it with Randall at all, but his whole process of tug,
Yeah.
right, that he does with his bird dogs. I think it's a really cool way that he's applied a working dog thing to a bird dog thing. And like, you know, being able to whoa the dog, walk up to the dog while the dog's staying in behavior, having the dog stay stable, and then the dog having the willingness to choose between a very high level reward, which is going after the bird and retrieving, right? That free expression of drive to fire off, instead than leaving behavior to take reward from dad, right? So, and again, like direct reward is going to build stability, right? When we walk in or we pay the dog directly from us, it's going to flatten the dog out instead of increasing state of arousal for the dog to fire off the pre-expressive drive. That's where you're going to make your money. Whereas as far as like an indirect reward, if you were to walk up to the dog and then release the dog for retrieve, that's indirect. So yeah, you can bet your ass that the dog's always going to be hanging out on the edge when you walk in because you've always released the dog. Your steps to walking in are the marker for indirect release, right? And that's probably why, I don't know, but like some people's dogs may fire off when they're in whoa when handler starts moving up, right? Because it's that preceding notion to indirect reward. When instead you want to move in and you want to have that clear delineation of, okay, go get it. Okay, take it from me, right? But your dog has to be able to choose between their hierarchy of rewards. Your dog has to be willing to take a lower level reward and understand that that higher reward is on a varied schedule. You get that sometimes, you get this a lot more than you get that, you know? And I think Randall's application of tug in that sense is phenomenal.
Yeah. And
But
and it doesn't have to be tug. Essentially, you can build such high value in whatever you want. Some people, Randall does it with his bite pillow and tug, and he's spoken about that on the episode that he's been on, and he truly does carry a bite pillow in his training belt and vest, and he
yeah,
can use that to mark and pay his dogs whenever he wants. The challenge is, you do have to build that reward to where, like,
yes,
inherently genetically, our dog's highest level of reward, we hope, is a bird, right? And so you can utilize that to your benefit, to where, okay, you shot that bird way out in front, but you might have another fresh killed bird in your vest, or a thawed out bird or something in your vest, and you shot the bird, the dog stayed there. You can still go reward that dog with the bird. But to your point,
yeah,
you may not want to always pay with the highest level reward. We might want to downscale that, and that is the point of getting the dog to where the reward is just the behavior in of itself. And so
yeah,
if you need to ramp up that dopamine response and the dog, like, yes, I want that, you need to build that enthusiasm. You might need to go higher up on the hierarchy, but you always have it in the back of your mind, or in the future, to downgrade that, and we're not always paying them with the highest level.
Yeah, and that, you got to get on a ratio. You got to get on a ratio of direct versus indirect reward, or really a ratio of higher reward versus lower reward, right? I'm not saying that if you want to get your dog, and because I don't know, I'm not a bird dog guy, I don't know how to train low. But if it were me and I want a dog to stay in behavior, and I don't want to flatten out my reward and devalue it, I'm not going to walk in every time and pay them directly. Sometimes I am going to release them to go and express, right? Because I get a higher state of arousal, because I get a higher dopamine release. Um, so you have to get on a ratio of, okay, well, I've paid the dog directly now, 3, 4, 5 times. Okay, here's your one. Go get it.
Yeah.
Right. Because what that's going to make is that's going to make a gambler. Dogs are inherently gambling. They're always going to gamble on the highest level of reward. So if you, through varied reward and through using different hierarchies of reward, make the dog a gambler, they're always like, oh, well, maybe if I stay in this behavior harder, longer, faster, the big reward will come. But they have to be willing to take the, like, okay, maybe next time I'll just take this for now, right? You want to build a gambler. You want to build what they call a dope addict, right? That dopamine release. Like, they're always hunting for it. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. Like, okay, great, but like, I'm gonna gamble on it.
But also, you can use that to your advantage, to where if you are training with something that a dog truly wants, you can use one of, some people claim that it's one of the most powerful quadrants in a dog, and negative punishment. You can remove that altogether. You can remove this game. You can take this away to where the dog breaks. Okay, you don't get the retrieve. And that doesn't mean, and this is what I was referring to earlier, somebody's going to go set up 3 birds or 5 birds in the field and they're going to run through it. That doesn't mean that the dog breaks on the first bird, you mark it, you take that bird away and you put it in the pouch, and then you move on to the next one. And then if he does right, he gets paid right. Make it mean something to the dog. Like, no, you broke, go put him up to where he actually gets the real message. And
Yeah.
denials are so powerful with these dogs, to where how and when you pay these dogs are important, but also the removal of the payment means just as much. And I've heard some people make the argument that it means even more to the dog.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When you use that negative punishment quadrant of operant conditioning, depending on the dog in front of you, it can be a very powerful, um, punishment to the dog. In the bite dog world, if I have a dog that's on a decoy in an active engagement, and he starts getting loose in the grip, or he starts getting chattery where he's moving around a lot, and he's not stable in the bite, at some point that decoy is going to be able to get himself away from that dog, and the dog's going to lose the bite. And then from that point, we go put the dog up. No, you lost this, right? If you want this again, if you want to possess this again, bite harder, stay stable, because it's not in the dog's advantage to move around and be chattery and not have a fully committed grip, right? So that negative punishment of going to the kennel, not chewing the bad guy up, not winning that engagement there, and losing that opportunity is incredibly powerful. And a lot of the times when you see that happen and you see the dog go away for about 5 to 10, and then you bring that dog back out, it's a monster.
Yeah.
And it'll be damned if it loses that bite again.
And you said 5 to 10, and this is something I was watching a Pat Stewart video a couple weeks ago, and that's what he said is, like, we're not talking about you remove it and then like they never get to see it again for days, right? Like, they're not going to conceptualize that like we do.
No.
So the importance is you remove it long enough for them to be like, damn, that was a lot of fun. I really wanted that bird. But this is also why it's important to have that negative marker. And this is where it comes full circle and bigger picture, is you can mark the instant that that dog's misbehavior or undesired behavior created the removal of the game. So if the dog breaks and the dog, just goes let's say he just blows through the collar pressure, gets the bird, comes back, and you go put the dog up, the dog doesn't know why it just got put up, why it got removed. He could even associate bringing the bird back to you as the game ending, and then you have a dog that doesn't want to bring a bird back to you. But if you have that
Exactly. Yeah.
negative marker, and it can be the e-collar, it can be the verbal, it can be no, it could be, it could be whatever you want, but you have to have that ability to mark exactly in time when that dog, as soon as he took a step, no, e-collar punch, get him to stop. Dog goes up in the kennel for 5 minutes, then he can come back out. And to your point, you're going to have a dog that's ramped up, ready to do even more, and you're going to see that dog try even harder on the next one if he truly understands the desired or targeted behavior.
Yeah. And to break it down real simple is like your dog has to understand everything before you start using that, right? Like
Yes.
your dog has to truly understand that. So in order to use that negative punishment, they have to understand the game. And like you said, you can create totally different games if your timing isn't correct. Um, so you really have to pay attention to what you're doing, and timing is important. Um, but negative punishment, yeah, man, it'll change them.
Yeah. Another situation, steadiness, that's a common one that I wanted to highlight to people is like, hey, if you're struggling with the dog tipping over the edge, you might have the dog that you need to pay in position, or maybe not even pay at all for a number of times, and you randomize it, whatnot. But you also might need to create a dog that has more drive. Maybe you have a dog that just like couldn't care less whether you release them or not in this scenario, right? So let's say that you've been a little heavy-handed, you've removed the drive. Maybe the dog just genetically didn't have the drive, or you didn't build it properly when it was younger. So instead of requiring further and longer steadiness, which is just going to go the opposite direction of what you want, you might need to have and build that dog a little bit higher level of anticipation. So using the reward at the right time and sending them a little bit more often could build a dog that maybe has been a little suppressed and is a little unenthusiastic in the field.
Yeah, because if that becomes a readily predictable reward, that expression and go do your thing, you do kind of have to make that in your sense, you have to make that the hope, right? And then dial it back. And that's that balancing act that you got to play in your system is like, and I want to emphasize that your system, it's not a system, the system, like it's yours. And you have to balance it with your dog. You know, drive building is incredibly difficult. Um, to manufacture stuff that's not there, it is difficult. You can do it. I've seen it done, but you got to do it correct. And your words, your actions, your timing of reward, your timing of correction needs to be done properly.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm curious to get your take on this, and this might be a strange question, so you can just kind of laugh it off.
I
But
love strange questions.
well, this one might be good. In your general question here, in your opinion, would it be easier? Let's say that the genetic components are in the dog. You have a bird dog. Genetically, it has a genetic desire for birds, but it's never been allowed. It's never been exposed to birds. It's never been given the opportunity. Let's say it's a 3 or 4 year old dog. For clarity's sake, let's just say 5 year old dog, never been able to express their drive or been around birds. Then you have a 5 year old dog with the same genetics that has been suppressed or capped so much that it's robbed the dog of its drive. Would you say it is easier to build a drive in the dog that's never been exposed, or would you say it's easier to build back the drive in the dog that's just been suppressed to hell and back?
No, I think it's probably, when I hear that, it's probably easier in my mind to build the drive in the dog that's never been exposed, because then there's nothing there to unpack, right? If I get a dog that, has been suppressed, has been told, no, do not do this, it's been corrected, and there's all this history there, of just suppression, or in what some people will call capping, which to me, capping is something completely different. Um, if I have a dog that's just been nothing but suppressed, I have to unpack all of that. Like I then have to recondition and retrain this dog to understand, like, no, you can do this. You know, you can go do these things. You can express, but that dog is going to be hesitant because of all of that history there. Whereas that dog that hasn't been exposed, all I got to do is worry about exposing the dog. And then I got to see what precipitates. Hopefully, what precipitates is an inherent drive for that dog to, want to, you know, go after the bird, pursue, chase, use the nose, whatever. Hopefully, everything I'm looking for precipitates from that exposure, which brings out a genetic drive that I can then, you know, mold and point in the direction I want it to go. Whereas, like, you know, I don't want to have to carve out another statue from this marble that's already all jacked up, you know? And maybe that's a harsh way to put it. It's not jacked up, but it's just more work. It's more work than you're in.
Yeah.
And it's not the dog's fault. The dog's been suppressed. The dog legitimately thinks, oh, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Right? Well, no, we have to now show the dog again that they can. And like I said, it's doable. 100% it's doable. You got to do it correctly, and it's going to take time.
Yeah.
Whereas your greener dog that just hasn't been exposed to it may not take as much time.
Yeah. Now, talk to me about, so we've kind of covered steadiness from both sides, to where you have a dog that's just teetering on going over the edge, and then you have the dog that's a little bit more reserved, that maybe, through too much pressure or poor genetics, what have you, there's a million reasons, that's just maybe uninterested. You can build that. Another common scenario is getting a dog on a retrieve to go out as hard as it wants to come back to you, right? There's an issue with getting, there's not an issue. Some people have challenges by the way that they go through force fetch, and that's another topic for another day.
So,
But
dude, we could spend the whole day on force fetch.
well, we will. Again, you referenced Chris. That's kind of what I have him earmarked for. But getting the dog to enthusiastically not just take a line, but come off a line. To me, the longer I stay in this world, there's kind of nothing more deflating than, I would rather a dog not know how to do a behavior or refuse to do a behavior than watch a dog just unenthusiastically just meander down a line, because it's like, I'm doing this because I have to, but it has no desire to. Like, I would rather watch a dog just outright refuse and doing it because it hasn't been shown the behavior yet or built up enough, than a dog that just, like, you send them and it's like watching paint dry. And by doing this, whether we're talking about, the marker to say, like, yes, this is good, or applying the pressure beforehand, getting some back pressure and releasing them, essentially pulling back a slingshot. I want to get your take on, like, what's some tips or suggestions that you could say would create more value to get that dog's enthusiasm back online and back to wanting to go get that retrieve.
Well, as far as, along those lines of building inherent desire to fire off, like you said, with enthusiasm, it kind of goes back to, you know, making the dog believe it's the dog's idea, right? You can make a dog do anything, but then there's the dog believing that it's the dog's idea to do it, right? Now, in my mind, when you pose that question to me, what I hear is like, okay, if my tools are charged, if my markers are charged, and the dog understands, at least the building blocks of, okay, something is about to happen. Like, I know there's something out there that I need to go get. Something's about to happen. Don't know what to do. All right. Charging that stem on your e-collar as that preceding notion to build up inherent, like, gas, if you will. And this is really, like, kind of goes into capping, is like, putting the lid on the pressure cooker, having that on the entire time that, like, say, I don't know, this may be completely wrong and you can correct me, but like you shoot the bird or whatever, the launcher bump or whatever is falling out of the sky, that dog is tracking it and just low level stem the entire time. And it's just loading that dog. And you may see the dog start to ants. You may see the dog start to prance a little bit. And right as that bumper bird, whatever, hits the ground and that dog understands a release marker, right? Or the command to go out and go away, stem goes off, go, right? That giant explosion of drive that's just been bottled up and then released. And they put all of that energy into it. All right. Another way that you can do it is literally, like, this sounded so stupid to me when I was young, but if you have an older dog that knows exactly what to do and the dog fires off perfectly, the dog brings a lot of energy, bring that young dog out and let him watch. Bring that dog that's not fully putting the pieces together and let him watch. Let him watch that other dog do these things with great intensity. And you have to have a good handler at the end of that. The handler has to make it enjoyable too. There has to be a lot of interaction there. And you're going to see that dog watch the other one and be like, man, that's really, really good for him. I want to do that. Right. And then let that dog go do it with them. Now, there are some prereqs to that. Your dog has to understand some level of the behavior change in order to get there. And I've seen it work in that realm. Another way you can do it is simply leash and collar, right? Like that withholding of the dog to go do, right? That back pressure on the line to build inherent forward drive, tapping into opposition reflex, and then firing the dog off like a slingshot. I mean, dude, there's so many ways that you can go about that, and a lot of them work. There's no one way.
Yeah. There's a time and place for each one of them in different scenarios,
yeah,
but they all kind of lead to it. And that's what I was kind of hoping that you would get to is like, if you're needing to build that enthusiasm with your dog, there's a number of ways that you can go
oh
about
yeah,
doing that, and hope is not all lost to where it's like, you don't know what you don't know. And the reason why I say that is I've talked about it on the podcast before, to where I've taken a lot out of one of my dogs, the Munstie, as I was learning, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And I took a lot out of her in different formats. You start applying pressure here, it's going to show up down the road somewhere else. And you don't really know that until it's kind of too late. Hindsight's 2020. But I've been going back, and by some of these tricks, I'm starting to build some of that enthusiasm a little bit more. She's starting to
yeah,
enjoy it a little bit more, and it's a lot more fun. It's like our relationship has kind of, not that it was like broken per se, but there were holes in it. And I'm starting
yeah,
to kind of see some of the band-aids kind of go over those holes as I've focused in on it this off season.
yeah. And like, I think taking a step back from your training, and like, at least with me, I've noticed when I take a step back and I am easier on myself, easier on my dog, as far as like adherence, right? Like when we're learning something new or something we haven't touched in a while, is like we kind of go back down to the basic level of just have fun, express, do your thing. This is a good interaction for you. It builds up that inherent motivation to want to do that stuff. And as the dog gets it, I can then start increasing my expectations again. And we can start putting some more rules on it, all of which are just a bridge to get to the ultimate expression of drive, right? Like with my dog's son, like his ultimate reward is to go for a bite, right? And are you familiar with the Premack principle?
I'm not.
So the Premack principle in layman's terms is, you got to do your homework to get your ice cream, right? So we teach it a lot. And neutrality to a decoy is, I may send the dog out to go, go to place. Okay, come back to heel. Okay, now go into a heads up heel. Okay, now go search for a bomb, indicate on the bomb. Okay, now go bite, right? all of that is the bridge to the ultimate expression, the ultimate reward, right? So once you get that drive back and you make all of the things that need to happen in your test, just the bridge to get to the ultimate, expression of drive and the ultimate reward, it's now a game, right? And you're just playing a game now. It's not about the test. It's not about you need to make these marks or else, right? It's like, okay, you know how to get there. You got to show me, right?
Yeah, man, I love it.
And
I don't. I don't really know. I mean, we're going on 2 hours now. I'm probably going to break this up into two episodes, to be honest. So I don't. I
God,
appreciate the time
you
so
can tell me
far.
to stop talking whenever. I'll talk. I'll
Man,
talk all night.
we're just
Right?
we're just gonna have to circle back and do another one because I eat this stuff up. Let's do this. You know, at the end of each episode, I like to kind of throw it to the guest, and kind of put them on the spot, and I simply just ask like,
Oh shit.
what's a question that I should have asked you that I didn't, and it can kind of go in any of the rabbit holes we've kind of gone in and out on this, or we can go back to markers on this. But what's something that, like, if you know, just general advice, or I should have asked you something in this conversation, what would that be?
Oh man, that really does put you on the spot. Um, Really, if I had to choose one thing, is how do I start going from a system where there is no communication, there are no markers involved. How do I get to this modern method how do I break out of my old ways and into this new stuff? Um, and it's not a like nice, pretty elaborate answer. Is like just start, just start doing it, right? And when you have to start changing things and moving into a different methodology of training, just start fresh. Start with new words, start with new actions, start with new expectations, and build up to your ultimate end goal and humble yourself. And like that's what I don't understand about a lot of the dog industry is it's, at least in the working dog world, it's a lot of egos, man. Like cool. Everybody wants to be the greatest trainer. Everybody wants to have the greatest dog. Awesome. So do I, but not at the expense of diminishing valuable knowledge for other people, right? Like, don't be afraid to reach out to other people that don't train like you train currently, and don't be afraid to look stupid. Like, look stupid. You're gonna suck at anything the first time.
That's how you learn.
Yeah, man. Like, shit. I'm not a photographer in any means, but I have this really like super cool hobby of like photography that I'm super into. My first pictures that I took were horrible, absolutely trash. Probably should just put the camera down. But like, I studied, I talked to people that were way better at it than I was. I watched and I practiced deeply on that task, and like failed. Mistake oriented training, like really focusing on your failures and like breaking them down. Like, in every failure is a victory. Okay, we failed here, but what was good, right? Pick that out. Small victory, build on it, right?
Yeah.
Now your failures are becoming less and less and less. To where like you encounter a problem, and you're like, okay, boom, been there before. Let me just do this real quick. Let me input this little fix or change something I'm doing, which 99.99% of the time it's something we're doing, because the dog 99.99% of the time is right. Um, because they're only doing the best with the information that we provide them.
Yeah.
Um, like, you really have to. It allows you to be able to, from a humble light, look at what you're doing, input a fix, change it, and make it better. Right? Like, feel like that was a shitty answer to that
No,
question,
man,
but
it was great, and it speaks to so many people in this that like they may listen to an episode such as this or some of the episodes previous that I've done with some of these guys, and they say the same thing. It's like, yeah, it's great, I get it, like it sounds great, dog that wants to actually do it. How do I go about doing it? And to your point, it's like we've been talking about the how. It's all baked
yeah,
into the cake, right? You
yeah,
create the reward. Let's figure out how to get the dog to work for that reward. And to your point, like just start doing it, and it won't start making sense until you just do it. You can't just, your dog is different, you're different. Nobody's going to be able to put this on a step by step piece of paper and have it be applicable to your situation. That's
yeah,
why like I wanted to do this episode on markers, and we've gone down a million different rabbit holes, and but we kind of still stayed on task with it to some extent to where I would advise people, if you're nervous, like you don't have to go full bore, you don't have to go full dog nerd on in this stuff. Continue doing whatever you're doing. If you're a compulsion training trainer, like if you live in the negative reinforcement quadrant and you never come out for air, okay, fine. Keep doing that, but let's start by just building a marker and pay on the back end. Just give a payment on the
yeah,
back end of the negative reinforcement and watch how that dog's behavior changes. Don't change anything else. If you're kind of hesitant about it, or you're nervous about like, man, I've been training this way for 30 years and it hasn't steered me wrong. That doesn't mean that we still can't improve upon it. Not to say that
yeah,
it's bad or it doesn't work, but if there's a chance to improve on it or at least make it a little more efficient, why not try it? And so I
yeah,
would advise people, build your markers, whether that's yes, good, whatever it is. I don't care what it is. Pick your poison, whatever comes naturally to you that you can apply consistently to the dog, and just start paying on the back end of the negative reinforcement. We're not saying throw out your entire system overnight, but just slowly implement some of these tricks. And you'll notice by balancing it out, by giving them yes and no, the dogs are gonna really figure out and come alive, and then you're playing with something that the dog actually wants. And I think that's where like so many people get confused, to where like they may get lucky and the dog's genetics naturally want that bird, and so they get the really good bird dog in the field, but then they have a nightmare to live with in the house. And the same way they train force fetch with just negative reinforcement, they try and do with kennel or place or take your pick inside the house, and it just doesn't work. And it's just like they're
yeah,
pulling their hair out, and then their dog ends up in an outdoor kennel, and they're sitting
yeah.
there like, man, like the dog's a crazy bird dog, but like he just can't live in the house. He can't live in the house because you haven't shown him how to live in the house.
And there's no markers in the house. Your markers are different, right?
Yes.
Those are two completely contextualized environments with completely contextualized markers.
Yeah.
And I would build upon your point of, examine your system, examine your methodology, put the magnifying glass on it and build your markers. Don't get hung up on the words so much as it is, where can I place a preceding notion to precipitate an action, right? Where are my markers going to help me, right? If my dog is unsteady on the low, or if my dog is not stable, and I can put a marker to build that inherent desire to fire off, then I need to put a marker there. If I need to build a terminal marker to, have my dog spin out of a heel and come behind me and take a ball on a rope, I need to build that marker. I need to build a marker of, okay, go bite a decoy. Okay, bite this pillow I have, right? Because ultimately those individual markers are linked to behaviors that mean totally different things, right? And contextually, when we use them, they're different, right? And again, it's why dogs end up in outdoor runs, is because, well, yeah, you have your markers in training, sport, birds, whatever, police work, whatever, but your dog's pet markers, if you will, just the in-home markers of like, this means this, or when you do this, I say this and this precipitates, like those need to be just as clear. That's
Mm-hmm.
why, because the communication isn't there. It's muddied up.
Yeah.
And it's okay to jack that up. It's okay to mess it up. Like,
you're
even if you've been
speak
training for 30
you're
years.
speaking English out in the field and speaking Spanish inside the house.
Exactly.
And
Like,
there's challenges because inside the house we have family, we have kids, we have wives.
yeah,
This is why we talk about they all need to be on board. And if you're in a situation to where there's chaos in the house, the kids are running amok, and Paw Patrol's on the television or something. You know what? Let's not force the dog to be in this environment just because we want them in the environment, because we want the image of the dog laying on the rug in front of the fireplace. Go put them up in the kennel. It's not fair to the dog to be in that situation to where they're only going to be tempted, they're only going to pick up bad habits, they're only going to get corrected. And this is where I like to back to the markers. If you have a negative marker, no, wrong, whatever it is, and that's all you're saying to your dog, that is your sign to go put the dog up. You're not in
yep,
a healthy environment, and you're not being fair to the dog, to where if all you're doing is just throwing negative markers at them, it's watering your marker down to where it means nothing because there's no consequences to it. But then B,
exactly.
you're not putting the dog in a situation to be successful. And it goes back to your point at the start of this. We have to show them the good. We have to show them the desired behavior. Then we can require it. But you can't require
Exactly.
it right out of the gate.
Exactly, man. Like, if you're gonna say no and you're not gonna show them what right is, how can you ever expect right?
Yeah.
Like, and if you keep just pounding BS into their head about no, 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 nothing, you can't do this, you can't do that, it's just conflict. Then your dog's not going to want to work with you or be in the house with you, rather.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I
No.
mean, it's a slippery slope, and you got to do it correctly. But anybody can figure it out. Even if you like, that's my big thing is like, if you're watching this and you've been training for 30 years in a certain way, and you're thinking about stepping out and going into a different methodology, do it, man. Like,
Have
please,
fun with it. Yeah.
yeah. But like, you may find that you love it and it works way more and it just clicks with you. And you're like, oh my God, where's this world been for the rest of
Man,
the past 30 years?
I'm not going to
Like,
lie. Part of the fun in all of this is tailoring your approach from day to day to the dog in front of you and what they're showing you. If I went
yeah,
out there and just did everything cookie cutter day after day, session after session, because some book told me to, I would be bored
yeah,
out of my mind. And I
yeah,
think that's where people just kind of get in this never-ending cyclone of they get three-quarters of the way through whatever method they have. They never quite reach the pinnacle of that method. And then they go get a new puppy, and instead of trying a new method, they just go back to square one of the previous one, and then they get to the same point. And then it's like, fast forward, you've gotten 5 or 6 dogs to the same standpoint every time, three-quarters of the way through, and you just never finish. Don't be afraid to add in new criteria, just new
yeah,
concepts. Doesn't mean you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Keep your method, but start applying some of these principles and sprinkle them in. And I think a lot of people would be pleasantly surprised at their dog's
yeah.
response.
And it's going to change. It would change their whole outlook on dogs in general and how they're interacting with them.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you have to change your mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we start going down another rabbit hole or on another topic, man, I think we need to wrap this up. Go ahead and pitch what you're doing at Southern State Canine, where people can find you, what you do, if they need help with something, if they have questions, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, man. So, Southern State Canine, we do a multitude of different dog training activities. If you need us for um, knee popo, pet obedience, working dogs, anything like this one that just came in here. Hi, did you open the door? Um, if you need us for knee popo, pet obedience, law enforcement consulting, government consulting, we do all of that too. Literally the only thing we don't do is bird dog stuff because I haven't hunted since I was about 18. Um, we do service dogs. If you need help in general, please reach out to Southern State Canine. You can find us at www.ssk9llc.com. You can find us on Instagram at at Southern State _K9.
There you
You
go.
can find us on Facebook at Southern State Canine. Um,
All these links
Yeah,
will be in the
and
show notes. If you need to
yeah,
click
it'll be
on
in the
it, let
show.
it know. And
2
Randall
hours will
did.
fry your brain.
Randall did say that we needed to highlight that the thing that you are the aggressive dog guy. Anybody with aggressive dogs need to reach out to you.
God damn it.
Yeah, that your face says it all right there.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna give him a call after this.
Yeah, there you go.
That's why I got that text before this episode. He's like, "Hope you have a good time, buddy."
All right, man. Well, I enjoyed it. We'll do it again. Thanks again for your time, and we'll talk soon.
All right, man. Thanks for the opportunity.